Framing in ArchiCAD. ArchiCAD has a roof wizard that's able to make the framing largely for us. Hipped-based roofs are very complicated and the framing is very complicated. And although this isn't necessarily completely accurate, well, it depends on what we mean by accurate, it's not making trusses for us, but it is making the majority of the framing. And so this is a great start. We can, of course, make trusses as well, and we could add trusses to this roof once it's created, but we can see that this is what ArchiCAD's doing, and you'll be impressed at least by how easily it does this, or how much it makes it automated. So I'll delete this, and we'll start this process again. So I'm going to go up to my roof plan, and on my roof plan, we can see a roof, and I'll view this in 3D, show selection in 3D. And so this is just a composite roof. It's a composite roof, so it's made out of a composite, and it's a multi-planed roof, and it's a hipped roof. So in terms of its actual build, in terms of its composition, its shape, that's what it is. But there's no framing involved in that at the moment. There's nothing special. It was just built using the roof tool and using the multi-plane roof tool. Now what we can do when we go to design, so I can either select this first or select it after, is I can go down to design. We have roof extras. We also have design extras. So this is a little bit confusing because under design extras we have truss maker, where we can actually create an individual truss. But at the moment we're talking about roof extras, where we have roof maker, and then we can have the roof wizard. So using the roof wizard, it now wants me to select the roof. I'm going to click on the roof that I'm going to create. And then it's going to ask me a lot of questions. Questions about the rafters, questions about beams, questions about purlins, trimmers, and ridges or ridge beams. So I can go through and answer all these questions. A lot of the time it's what's the size of the beam. Now, of course, these are, in a way, engineering questions, and this would be determined by the engineer. And it really depends on whether we're doing it as a conventional roof or whether we're doing it as a trussed roof. Sometimes, as a building designer and architect, we don't necessarily know that. Now, what would be the determining factor? Generally speaking, a trussed roof means it has a flat ceiling, and it's cheaper and faster to build on site than a conventionally framed roof. I would generally, with new builds, only use a conventionally framed roof if I wanted to expose those beams. And that would generally mean that I would have a raked ceiling, not a flat ceiling. Of course, there are alternatives to this. We could have a scissor truss where we actually have a raked ceiling as well. And we could be using a conventional roof if it was a traditional type of roof, even if we're having a flat ceiling. But the rules tend to stand. So in this case, because this is a fairly simple type of home, I'm only after a flat ceiling. That's what the client wants. And so therefore I'm using a truss-based system. And again, like I explained at the very start, unfortunately, this roof wizard's not really good at doing truss roofs or trusses using the roof wizard setting. We have to set up individual trusses separately, which we can do later. To start with, we're just going to set up the roof framing or the rafter framing. So the rafters, the beams, the purlins, the trimmers, and the ridges. So if we go through this slowly, I want each section, each piece of timber to be based on a 45 by 90 millimeter piece of pine. I'm using here just a surface, wood, pine, grained, horizontal. I could use whatever I want, and I want to put it on the layer called roof structure. Now it's going to ask me a lot of different questions. What's the distance between normal rafters? I want 600 centers. Now, if I was going to make that out of smaller bits of timber, say a 35 by 90, I might make that a 450 millimeter center for the rafters or for the trusses. Again, I don't really care about that at the moment. I'm just trying to show it indicatively, and of course I'll leave it up to the engineer or to the truss manufacturer to determine the exact sizes and exact requirements. Again, as it's a trussed roof, I'm not using that space. It's not part of the architectural feature. It's not exposed, so I'm not as concerned about the actual structural sizes at the moment. For the beam, I also want that to be 90 by 45. It's very likely that these could be larger, but that will be fine for now. I have a few options here where I can create either a collar tie or a tie beam. So in this case, the collar tie being high, the tie beam being low is really what it's getting at. And in this case, I'm saying I want that to be 0 to the story. We can have purlins, and we can see how much that's cut. So this is the plate on the wall. How much is that cut? Trimmers, ridges, and we'll go back to here. And I also want to have a soffit. And in this case, I've made the angle of the soffit 0, meaning it's a flat soffit. So I've got all of the settings set up. I'm happy with what it's showing. It now just needs to make it. So once I press OK, it's going to automatically make all of these elements. I can then select it. I can select it with the roof. Let's do that first. Show selection in 3D. And of course that means you're not going to see much because it's being hidden within the roof structure. In this case, we can see it's at the bottom of the roof structure. Now, the height of it's not really relevant because I can just select all of these elements and just choose to elevate it, edit, move, elevate, and I can then elevate it up to the top or wherever it needs to sit. Of course, in reality, I need to understand how this works in structure, and that's why I've created it as a composite, because this is built up of multiple layers. But at the moment, that's not making a lot of sense. So let's just go back to my roof plan. I'll just select the framing this time. Show selection in 3D. And so we can see all of the framing elements now that have been built, all for us. And like I said, we can then go back, and if we want to now build these as trusses, we can use the information that's there to help us to identify where the truss needs to be. To make sense of that in a little bit more detail, what effectively I'm talking about is having a section that cuts through a roof. So in this case, I've got a section here. So we'll open this section. And what we can see here in the elevation is that's the framing. I'll delete this. And we'll change this to construction. Construction. So we can see all of the framing elements here. And so I can then use that to determine where my truss elements, so in this case, the truss elements that aren't showing is the bottom chord and the web. So I can start with that and I can add to it, or I can effectively replace it. So there's a few options in order to be able to represent that. Of course, the other way of understanding is I don't necessarily need to draw the truss if I'm using a ceiling, so in this case a slab, which is representing the bottom chord of the truss as well in a continuous type of fashion. So it's all a question of how much detail we need to show, and that's largely dependent on what's the type of drawing or what stage of the project are we up to.